Hello, folks.
Hi, hello.
Hello. Hello. And hello to everybody who is watching either live or in the future watching us back on YouTube or Facebook. My name is Aoife Spillane-Hinks, and welcome to the second episode of Axis Loves Theatre, a series of conversations in which we talk about the joys of seeing live performance and about some of the shows that we will never forget. I am the lead artist of Axis's pop-up literary department, and I am joined this evening by three fantastic guests. First up, we've got Chandrika Narayan-Mohan, who is a writer, performer, and the marketing and development manager for Fishamble, the new play company. Hey, Chandrika.
Hello.
And you are in Dublin 8 tonight, right?
I am, live from the Liberties.
So are you by any chance near the window that does the theater?
There's a theater window that I am not aware of. I only moved here 2 months ago on Christmas Eve in lockdown. It was a journey.
That is wild. Okay. Well, we will get back to that theater window in a moment because it's amazing.
Yes, I must know.
I nearly actually pulled photos of it, but then I was like, God, like everyone knows all about that. I won't bother any. But okay, we'll talk about that in a moment. Next up, we've got Angus Oak Mcnally, who is an actor and artistic director of Rise Productions. Hi, Ango.
Good evening, Spigs. How are you?
I'm good. And you are calling us from what you might call one of the greatest locations in the world.
I don't think it's up for debate. I'm coming from the main streets of Portmarnock in North County Dublin, right on the beach. And every day's a happy day, and my town's better than towns that are better than your town.
All right. Well, we shall debate that. And finally, we've got Aifric Ruairc, who is Axis's Irish language and project coordinator. And you are right now in Bray, right?
I am. We just moved into a house, so that's why there's nothing behind me. We don't own any furniture yet, so we have nothing. Just blank walls. That's it. Nothing.
It's an incredibly dramatic setting, though. It looks very purposeful.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. It's just, unfortunately, poverty. I'm joking.
And Aifric, you are originally from Ballymun, right?
Yeah. So I grew up in Ballymun. I actually said I grew up in the Axis. So I was one of the first participants in kind of projects when the Axis opened, and then I kind of stayed there until eventually they gave me a job.
Oh my God. That is fantastic. Wow. So what year was it that you first started engaging with the Axis?
So that would have been like, it's the 20-year anniversary this year of Axis. So 2001, I think I had just started secondary school, and I was part of, we were kind of doing an Irish language documentary because Ray Yates was the artistic director then, and he's big into Irish, and it just about growing up in Ballymun and what's it like. And I remember being quite like, I was on the defense. I was like, it's great. What are you talking about? We have no problems. And so been 20 years now with Axis in one form or another, but working with them since 2013.
Okay. That's lovely. And back when we used to have offices that we were allowed to go to, I shared many happy months with you last year, but I feel like this is the closest I've come to seeing you in a really long time. So it's great.
A long time.
So listen, this evening we're going to talk about some shows that have stayed with us from years past. And some of these shows folks watching might have seen, or more than one of us will have seen it on the call. And I've got some images that we can have a look at as we're chatting about some of those shows. But I might start with one that I believe everyone except for me has seen, which goes by the simple name of Hamlet, although Chandrika has another name for it.
When I emailed which plays I want to talk about, I just said, so I really want to talk about the batshit Hamlet. And then I had to explain which Hamlet I was talking about. But I feel that people will know already that I'm referring to the German one, the Ostermeyer one in Bord Gosh and DTF. Oh my God, what year was it? DTF was 2014. Yes. And it was a whole experience.
And so what is one of the top things about it that makes it the batshit Hamlet?
I mean, I guess the first part was the fact that we were in the Bord Gosh, you know, which like the week after I went to Jersey Boys, and I was like, oh wow, what a different atmosphere. Like that we were in a space that was usually made for like mainstream theater and amazing performances, but this was like crazy. First of all, the set was amazing and visceral and interesting. Like it had chain link projections. There was real mud and real water and juice boxes thrown around. So like there was liquid flying everywhere and it was atmospheric. And even though it's a huge space, but you felt very in it because there was so much like liquid and dirt and things flying around. And that's just real water just coming down. So it was just this crazy sensory experience, even though, you know, you were pretty far back. The whole thing was in German with subtitles. The subtitles sometimes didn't match, so the actors made fun of the subtitles. They would call out people in the audience. There was full frontal male nudity when someone like flicked the man's wang for hilarity's purposes. It was like, what is happening? And it was brilliant. Like it didn't like, but it remained artistically excellent throughout all the craziness. So it was just a wild ride. And I couldn't believe that we sat there for 3 hours and watched Hamlet in German with subtitles, which, you know, on paper does not sound wonderful. It was like second by second engaging. It was so much fun. And you left going, what did we just see? It was great. It was class.
Aifric or Angus, that was a really comprehensive description of the world into which you enter. But are there any embellishments or specifics you'd like to add about your experiences watching it?
Your memory is amazing, Chandrika, first of all. So good. I think it was one of these things where the Bord Gosh had felt like almost a very separate kind of space in lots of ways. Like it was a little bit of London in Dublin. And that was the moment when it became kind of more part of the community, or it started to feel like it was our space and we owned it, even though that's not an Irish production, but it felt like it was becoming part of the Dublin Theatre Festival, part of Dublin, and part of, you know, we all had a little bit of ownership in it, if you know what that means. So it was important, I think, for the Bord Gosh, just even to, was it still called the Grand Canal Theatre then?
No, it was Bord Gosh for sure.
It was still Bord Gosh. Yeah. So it was very interesting.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I had an amazing time at that show. I was part of the Next Stage program at Dublin Theatre Festival that year, so I saw everything. I saw every show in the festival, and there's something kind of unique about that experience of seeing so many shows in such quick succession. And you know, and you're working all day doing workshops or Q&As or talks or interviews with, you know, various people involved in the festival, and then just seeing maybe 2 or 3 shows a night for the full kind of 2.5 weeks. And it's intense, and we were doing long old days. And it's kind of weird because shows start to speak to each other. I mean, obviously there's a curatorial vision of Willie, how he's programmed the whole festival together, but not many people get to see everything in it. And to have shows that you kind of wouldn't have thought are being programmed in partnership, just you see themes being picked up or passed around. So we were there en masse, all of us in this jam-packed Bord Gosh. And again, it's that thing of, you know, the traditional fare in the Bord Gosh. You know, I think Stephen Falloon does an incredible job programming that place, and you know, they do incredible business there, and big shiny you know, touring productions of those West End and Broadway shows. And so to put this in there was this real culture shock for an awful lot of people going, hang on a second. But it was fascinating. It was one of those situations where, again, as Chandrika was saying, you know, on paper, the idea of 3 hours of German Shakespeare may not be the most appealing, but it was incredible, like really, and I think it speaks an awful lot about the real power of theatre when we get it right, that it can kind of transcend any of those language barriers or anything else, that the the very liveness of it, the having those bodies in that space in front of you, the nature of those performances, really comfortable ensemble play, big, shiny, starring players as well, taking on those leads. Crazy as hell, sexy as hell, messy as hell. Kind of all the good things you want theatre to be, I guess.
And the filming was amazing. As in, like, they interwove filming and projection in a really inventive way as well, where like that's when you see the bits projected on the chain screen, like all of a sudden the perspective moved within the actual framing of the play itself. So that was just very like smoothly done, while like and on such a big crazy production, to see that move through it and have your senses are always alert. And it was just, artistically, it just played. It felt like you were watching people play with theater, have the time of their lives, and have it work.
Mm. And now, Angus, you were talking about how you went to see that with The Next Stage. So you were with a gang of fellow practitioners of one kind or another. Chandrika and Aifric, how about you? Who did you go along to see this show with, if you went with other folks?
I can't remember at all. No memory whatsoever.
The play was so memorable. All companions were just obliterated in your memory.
I don't remember. That's why I'm even surprised at how well you remember this. But having said that, I know you asked us to talk about shows, Aoife, that we had seen before, and the ones that I chose feel like they're from years ago, and I remember who I went with to them. So it's funny, the ones that stand out to you, it isn't just going in to see the show, it's the experience from start to end that you really remember. It's an event going to see theatre. I think that's a big event we all miss.
I saw it with, so at the time I was running the arts and culture program in the liquor rooms, and was very lucky to get a ticket to the opening night. So I wasn't working in the arts at the time. I had a stint where I couldn't work in the arts because of immigration. But while I was there, I brought my fellow sort of marketing colleague who also ran stuff in the liquor room. So not arts people at all. And she had the time of her life, which I thought was like a wonderful surprise, because I did warn them, I don't know how crazy it is, but it looks kind of cool. Free ticket. It's Hamlet for 3 hours in German. And she and her partner came, and like, we still talk about it. And I love that she is not an arts person, not a theater person, but just someone who was like willing to just go have an experience. And it was delightful that she enjoyed it as much as I did. It was so cool.
That's such a brilliant point as well. I find that when we bring folks to the theater who don't, we're so lucky. Our lives, when theaters are open, our lives are all filled with seeing theater all the time. And, so much so that sometimes it really does feel like work. It's so many evenings out and everything else. But we think about folks who might only see a couple of plays a year, if that. And I find when I go to theater with friends who aren't in the theater, for whom it's often a very special event to go to the theater. And that it kind of, in our friendship conversations, it becomes one of the touchstones, if it was good, if it was a great experience.
Oh no, we still say 9 Hamlet 9 as like an in-joke, like however many years later. So it sticks. Like, it was an event. That will never forget. I don't think she will either. I don't think her partner will forget it for other reasons. But she enjoyed it.
Well, and so we go from this huge scale show, this German show coming in to be performed in one of our huge, humongous theaters. And I wonder whether we might jump to perhaps the smallest scale show in terms of audience size, and a very local piece, which is The Boys of Foley Street. And Angus, I know you sent that in, but I know I've seen it. Other folks might have seen it as well. But I wonder if you might tell folks what the piece is like, what it's about, why you mentioned it.
It remains probably one of the most, in terms of, if you want to choose like the single most electric moment I've ever experienced in a theatre, that show contained that. It's from Anu, so it's Louise Lowe and the gang making this kind of multi-location, site-specific, site-responsive collage-style work of hugely expressionistic pieces in places, and then ultra realism and naturalism, a kind of a bizarre mashing together of all those kind of styles, and incredibly immersive, and hugely powerful and affecting. And emotive, and so there's the wonderful Katrina Ennis on the screens now, and there's a moment after this scene that occurs in that flat, which is profoundly disturbing and unsettling, where as you're being led out of this flat, Katrina just takes your hand, and that moment, because I didn't know Katrina at the time, and I was 100% convinced that was a legit 12-year-old schoolgirl. I was going, man, they're getting a hell of a performance out of this girl. And as she took my hand, kind of like, don't leave me here. And that the intimacy of that connection, and how frighteningly and terrifyingly real it was, is legitimately the most electric moment I've ever experienced in a theatre. That blurring of that line between fact and fiction, what's real and what's not, and you talk about an audience's suspension of disbelief or willingness to go with a show like that. The nature of how Louise and Owen and the gang make these shows is that it is so immersive that it's very easy to lose yourself in it, even for those more expressionistic scenes and elements of it. You can get really really lost in it, and it certainly had a huge power on me.
Yeah. I remember that was the first time that I had seen Katrina Ennis as well, and I had the exact same experience as you did. I remember feeling really concerned. I was sure that Anu would have looked after this young performer, but I remember just thinking, what is it like for a young person to go through this? And it was an adult who could just so magnificently go back into that youth and that moment, exactly as you talked about, where you're kind of implicated in this. Yeah. Oh, so I'm just reading, Aifric has just dropped in some comments from the Facebook live stream. Pamela McQueen says, fab, Boys is one of my top 10 for sure. I loved it so much I wrote a whole chapter of a book about it. Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's Aifric or Chandrika, did either of you see that production?
No, I never got tickets to see it. I completely missed it. But it was one of those ones that was painful to miss.
Yeah.
Everybody was talking about it. And I feel like a lot of people kind of try to imitate it, or it certainly influenced things from then on. Yeah. Like, I don't know how many times have any of you heard, it's a bit like Boys of Foley Street.
I imagine working in a venue, you might hear that even more than most from people who are saying, listen, I have this idea, and here's where it's coming from. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Which is not a bad thing at all.
I think after every Anu ticket sale, there's the sad people club, which apparently is you and me, Aifric, that did not get tickets. And you're like, but my life, but why? So so I've always missed out as well, and it's always been heartbreaking. And I finally managed to go see Fault Line, which was the first time I managed to get tickets to an Anu show, and I'm so grateful I got to. So I can't imagine what Boys must have been like, because you can't even try and imagine the experience. But my experience of Anu was magical and spectacular, and I just want to go back in time and see every single one of them.
Yeah.
One of the things I found fascinating about it is kind of the legacy of a show like that, in terms of how it has shaped my perception of an area of Dublin I know well and work in regularly. And it's that thing of when works of art are very much of a place, even if they're not necessarily about a place, they're very much of a place. This was both of and about the place, and so now I can't for those of us who work in theatre, we'll often be rehearsing in the lab or in Dance House, both of which are on Foley Street. The bus that I got into town from when I was a teenager drops me up Talbot Street, whatever. So it's an area I know intimately, and yet I see it through fundamentally altered eyes every time I walk that street now, because this sounds like hyperbole, but it's actually not. The experience of that hour fundamentally shifted the lens through which I view that part of town. And again, a part that I knew, I would have thought incredibly well. Fundamental shift, like real seismic shift, powerful altering of how you engage with your own city.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true the way that they activated all these pockets of a street you might have walked down a million times before, with so many of those shows that were focused in that area. And it was just changed irrevocably. Okay, brilliant. There are a bunch of comments coming in about this, and we've got from Mark O'Brien, Axis's Own. I remember rehearsing a show in the lab at the time and looking out the window and seeing them rehearse. And then Rosanna Purcell saying Jed Murray was fighting another cast member down a lane, and random passersby started filming it on their phones, thinking it was real. His energy was terrifying and electric. Yeah. I remember having a moment with, was it called World's End Lane, which was the first piece of theirs I had seen. And they had, I don't know whether the sequence was the same for everybody, but my first stop was putting on a pair of headphones. It was in the lab on Foley Street. So there's that gallery space that has those huge glass windows. So I was just sitting there enjoying my artistic experience. And this young woman wearing tracksuit bottoms and a puffy vest just banged on the window. And and she just kept banging on the window. And I believe it was Dee Burke, who again, I think I hadn't seen perform before that point. And I didn't know was a part of, and she just kept telling me to come out. And so finally I just took off the headphones and I went out. And then when I got out there, she admonished me. She said, do you just come outside and meet anyone around here? Just come outside and do what they tell. Of course, it was part of the show. But those encounters with Anu's work, especially for the first time, when you're just going, what are the rules here? And what is real and what's not, as we walk through real places.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Again, in those kind of the magic in those early days of using kind of younger performers who weren't, regularly on the main stage in the Abbey, shall we say, that those lines were so blurred. And this is back before I knew Louise at all, had worked with Anu at all. And so you go, kind of, part of you kind of treats it like you're in Disneyland, and you go, oh, okay, well, I know that's not really Cinderella's castle, but while I'm here, I'll pretend it is Cinderella. And you kind of throw yourself into it, because you have a presumption that you will be minded. You have a presumption that everything's going to be safe. But things get so real in the middle, you kind of go, I mean, I guess they've checked that everything's safe. I guess this isn't really good. Like, am I going to incriminate myself here? Am I going to end up in a real fight? And it gets you in this really uncomfortable place where you're knocked off kilter. You're not taking things for granted. And I think that's a really fascinating thing to do to an audience, because obviously the duty of care is always there, and they are meticulous in how they mind people. But within the meticulous nature of minding people to that extent, to create such a level of uncertainty at times and really just knock an audience off kilter and go, okay, let's ask some questions about ourselves. Fantastically. It's so skillful. It's so skillfully done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, yeah. And it, you mentioned that moment with Katrina Ennis, where she, asked you to help her, to get her out of there. And I think there's almost always at least one moment like that in an Anu show, where somebody asks you to do something for them. And I know I've had the experience, and maybe all of the folks on this call are similar, because we are theater people, that you want to be in the show so badly that you absolutely, you break over to the other side and you're like, I am promising this, and it feels real. And there's a kind of compact there between the audience and the performer, which, as you say, continues to have duty of care. And yet it blurs the boundaries again in meticulously controlled ways. Yeah. We're getting loads of messages in here. Rosanna Purcell also says, when I saw Vardo, there were 3 other strangers on my audience round. And afterwards, we were all so stunned. We went for a coffee together to debrief and share our experience of it. Beautiful. And Mark O'Brien has a couple of things. I remember when Louise did a show, Louise Lowe from Anu, did a show with Roundabout Youth Theatre where the audiences started in Axis Foyer and moved to the flats. Brilliant. And he tells, okay, this is again from Mark, local councillor tells an amazing story of bringing an American visitor to the show set in a regenerated Ballymun and then explaining that this was not real. It was hilarious. Brilliant.
I think that the Anu debrief is like, so I go to theater alone because I don't want to herd cats and I couldn't be bothered. But like after Fault Line, so that was just in the basement of Poetry Ireland, which was a whole labyrinth I had no idea existed. And I mean, first of all, that just shook my world anyway. And I came out and there was like a queer couple there and they were just like holding each other and crying. And I'm like, oh my God. Oh yeah. So I can't imagine what every other one of those shows would have, you know, evoked in people afterwards when strangers come together or couples come together or friends. And yeah, it's hard to create that atmosphere and that giant overflow of feeling and that you need to sit down and recover. So it's amazing that they have a legacy of that with all their shows. Like, pretty amazing.
Absolutely. And it, you know, it's brilliant that you bring up Fault Line because we think about those earlier shows which felt like that area of Dublin around Foley Street was the set. And obviously they were working with design in incredible ways at that point. But then you think about something like Fault Line, which, as you say, it was downstairs, it was in a space which had to be converted and transformed. And it was so immersive, wasn't it?
I later realized that even like the stickers and the graffiti on the little bits were all designed because I was like, oh, this must be at least some part of this converted, I think, school area. And it blew my mind, the level of detail that was involved. It was amazing.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. And it's interesting as well because you think about, Anu always seems to use showtime as part of the design concept. You know, it's so a part of the experience, whether you're spit out of the show and it's daytime and you're looking around you and it's transformed. Or I don't know what you felt like, Chandrika, with Fault Line, but I came out and I remember it was nighttime and I just felt alive in the night.
It was weird because I could see Poetry Island from my old flat. So Fishamble is also on that corner. I literally lived pretty much next to Fishamble for like 3 years. But then I stepped outside of this world and I was back basically at my office in my home. And it was just weird. It was like stepping out of a time portal. Like that's what it really felt like. Because it wasn't just any street. It was my own street. So how weird is that to step out of this story that was so like devastating and engaging and beautiful into your own gaff almost? Like how weird. It was really discombobulating and that made it better.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. Okay. Oh, now we've got okay, super. We've got loads more comments. See, we need to do like a whole series just on Anu.
I mean, yeah.
So Pamela McQueen says Owen Boss is the amazing designer of Anu. Yeah, thank you. And I know, Angus, you name checked him as well, but yeah, great to get that out there. Is the amazing designer of Anu. Fantastic installations on their Moore Street show too. And then Owen O'Sullivan says, absolutely, those first encounters with Anu are magical. The Lost O'Casey was my first, and I was completely knocked off kilter, as Angus says, shook to the core by Sarah Morris's work that evening, and all the audience taken on different narratives. Unreal. And he says, referencing last week when we talked about standing ovations that just kind of happen all at once, I'd have given a massive ovation at the end of that, but you just drift alone back out at the street and know you absolutely experienced something unique. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. I wonder whether we might, we've been talking a lot about the place of the audience and the immersion of the audience and perhaps the complicity of the audience in this work. And maybe we turn to another company that's known for its work with that kind of form, that kind of vibe, which is Punch Drunk. And we've got The Drowned Man as the Punch Drunk show that Chandrika brought up. So I wonder whether you might bring us into that.
Yeah, I mean, so I work for Fish Amble now, but that was my first theatre job. Like, and I'm an art historian, and I've worked for the Irish Architecture Foundation as their fundraiser. So my way through the arts is very meandering. So I've never been like theatre person.
Yeah.
It's actually when I moved to Dublin was the first time I properly went to theatre. It was my way into Irish history when I rocked up alone after being kicked out of the UK. And I was like, I'll go to the Fringe and figure out this country. But in those years when I became more like interested in theatre while here, I went to London and experienced Punch Drunk. And yeah, I guess the Anu experience folds in so nicely into that utterly immersive thing. And I guess it's one of the first times I realized like, oh my God, this is what theatre's like as well. Like I now realize that in university there was totally copycat productions trying to emulate that kind of vibe because I didn't know about it back then. But it was me and my best friend, in this warehouse, and there are pros and cons, definitely. I know some people hate this kind of stuff. I am one of those absolute suckers for crazy, immersive, interactive, don't know what's going to happen, don't know if you're going to be pulled into a trailer. And like my friend got free whiskey out of it. I was really annoyed I didn't get any cool interactions like that. But it was amazing. And I also just was like, oh, the choreography of just herding us in this intricate maze. And I'm like, how did we all end up in the same room? Just the pure mechanisms behind it, I found delightfully fascinating, even though I almost got stuck on one floor the whole time because I did not realize you could go between floors because I'm very rule abiding. So pros and cons, but also just that, yeah, the level of detail. Like I stood in front of a dresser for like 15 minutes wasting my time because I want to look at every scrap of paper and every handwritten note that made up one dresser in this like 5-floor fantasy land. So like, yeah, I know it's not a lot of people's cup of tea. Grand. I just really like multidisciplinary interactive experiences. Doesn't have to be theater, just when lots of different disciplines and experiences are combined and you're just taken somewhere else for a while. I really like that feeling. And that was the most, like, I'll never be more immersed than that, I don't think. Not to that scale, It was insane. And it was amazing to come out and go, I've now seen a Punch Drunk show. I now know how to stretch the boundaries of that level, that kind of immersive theater. There's lots of different types of immersive, but yeah. And like when I came and saw Anu, I'm like, okay, cool. This is the Irish voice of that same tone, but it's deeply individual and so different. And I like that structure. And I like how different people and different nationalities and different artistic voices play with that structure. Because it's a unique experience in itself. But then when all these different theater companies have their takes on it, it's amazing and fascinating, the little pocket worlds you get to go into and come out of.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. What you talk about missing out on something in a Punch Drunk show. I remember seeing Sleep No More, and I saw it with my friend Steve in New York. And we were split up. We were given different tickets. And he came back talking about this floor that I had no idea existed. And just some people got out to get off at that floor and some didn't. And it's an interesting thing to make the experience so unique that you can get lost at one dresser for an hour, or you can just never have known about an entire floor. And that's your experience.
It's an intriguing way of working because kind of dramaturgically, as you're creating a show like that, the knowledge that no one will get 100% of the work that you make, like even with repeated viewings, they may not even get to cover 100% of the show. And so the idea of like the balls you need to juggle to make sure that that whatever experience they get, some of which may well be kind of random in order, will be theatrically satisfying, dramaturgically robust kind of thing. And I find that as an absolutely fascinating thing, that the idea that kind of through elements where you get 90% of the collage, that it'll come together and that will be what you get, but also it kind of ties back into the kind of the ephemeral nature of why live theatre is as special as it is that every time we go and see a show, depending on where we're sitting in the audience, depending on how the actors are feeling that night, depending on whether we were late getting to the theatre or not, it will never be repeated precisely like that again. It's a completely unique experience. So it's kind of that just turned up to 11. It's like it's the natural conclusion of, okay, well, how do we kind of create this thing that can never ever be repeated? And so I love that idea that, talking to people afterwards going, oh, and what about the girl with the bowling ball? I was like, oh, there was a girl with a bowling ball? Like, I think that's kind of brilliant.
Absolutely. And yet, now I don't know about with The Drowned Man, but with Sleep No More, there were certain things that they had to get you to see. And so there were ways in which they would induce your movement towards one place at a certain time to get the big bang for everyone to be present for that. Was there a similar thing going on in your experience, Chandrika? Was there something that ultimately they had to get you to?
Yeah, and I felt like once I realized, I'm like, wait, we're all in one room. And I was like imagining in my head like a little blueprint and these doors shutting and shutting and shutting, and you're being like pinballed. That's what I was like, oh my God, they're literal people scurrying upstairs behind doors going, everyone's out, shut the door, shut the door, shut the door. And like funneling us, but like hundreds of us. Like, how did they, like, just the sheer logistics of that is fascinating. Cause I'm like, but none of us noticed we were being funneled. How did you guys do this? Like, whoa, when we're all in random crevices of this warehouse. So just logistically, I was like, that's so cool. That feels like a heist, that kind of, the adrenaline of it must have been crazy for those literal people, like the actual crew running around, shutting doors and funneling us into these rooms. Awesome. Like, artistically aside, I'm like, logistically, how thrilling is that?
Yeah. And theater so often, the creation of theater is so often the intersection of the logistical demands and the artistic visions, right? So I can only imagine that the process of putting that together had a knock-on effect on the design, on the concept, on the realization, that probably made things even richer in certain ways, even as they came up against seemingly insurmountable challenges at one point or another.
Yeah, like now I work in theater, I know I have glimpsed at the machine, and I was like, wow, that's a very complicated machine. So looking at something like that, I have a very brand new appreciation for the level of humans running around being impeccably efficient and just getting everything right in this crazy complicated structure. Very brand new appreciation of these big complex shows for sure.
Yeah well, and a very different kind of show in some ways, but a show which has a lot of moving parts and has design on a grand scale is one of the shows that you mentioned, Aifric, is Dark Materials.
Yeah. So I saw this when I was like 12 or 13. So I knew it. I was interested there when Chandrika, when you were saying that you came meanderingly into theater, and I'm just wondering if there's one show that you saw that was like, oh, this is it, I want to get involved in that. But for me, like, his Dark Materials was definitely the moment when I was like, oh, I love this. I love it so much. So like the whole experience, I suppose it kind of started, it was on in London when we were gifted. It was actually my mom was gifted tickets for Christmas to go over and see it. And then she couldn't go in the end. And me and my sister and my dad went instead. And she was devastated. But it was like, it was crazy. It was just one of these things that just felt unbelievably brilliant, and I think about it so much all the time. And it's funny, I've gone back now and read reviews of it as an adult, and they were kind of like 3-star reviews, and I'm like, I remember it being the best thing I had ever seen. And that's Anna Maxwell Martin there in the photos, and the cast was just amazing, and she keeps popping up in things again and again. But I mean, there was other people like Russell Tovey was in it. I can't remember what your man's name, Dominic Cooper. And it was 6 hours long as well. It was a massively long production. And it was pretty much the whole trip to London. It started at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and you watched for 3 hours, and then you went away and had a 2 hour break, and you came back in and you watched another 3 hours of theatre. And my sister can only have been like 7 or 8 years old. But it just, every time I think about like kind of children's theatre and what we can give children, I think about this and how important it's been for me. And how important it was for my sister, and just how much we enjoyed it. We loved it. It had puppetry, it had moving stages, it had a really complicated story. I don't know if anybody is familiar with his Dark Materials, but they're 3 novels. I'm going to do a spoiler now, so if you're watching the television series, like, look away. Spoiler time. But at the end of it, like, Lyra kills God. That's the end of the show. And like, just a children's play that starts off with a little girl finds something magical, very Harry Potter-esque, and then just keeps going until she kills God. And it was mind-blowing, and it was one of those feelings of, theatre is the most exciting thing. Nothing else could tell this story in this way and feel so immediate and like we're living in it. And just like what you said, Chandrika, about coming out of it, that experience, like, remember at the interval, it wasn't really the interval, the space between part 1 and part 2, and we came out and we were in the National Theatre in London, and that kind of walking out onto the Thames and seeing it all out in front of you, Waterloo Bridge, it was a really big experience. And I think I equate theatre now with that kind of massive excitement. And I think we've all seen theatre when theatre is not great, it can be quite unbearable because of that same immediacy. You're stuck there in there and you have to get through it. But when it's brilliant, it is that kind of exhilarating feeling that you'll never get over. And I loved it. I've seen other 2-part long plays now since then. I saw the Harry Potter ones, and I saw Angels in America again in the National. That was another big 2-parter that takes up your whole day, and it really almost seeps into you. When it's over, you don't know what to do when you see theatre that's that long. But yeah, his Dark Materials for me, that's the beginning of my whole love affair with theatre. And nothing has kind of compared since. It's always been the height of it.
Well, I feel ripped off. I didn't know that existed. Offended that that's not in my life. I didn't know.
Well, yeah, it's brilliant.
Go look at the images. For whatever reason, it was really, I just run around Google and find images of these shows and download them. And for some reason, the images of his Dark Materials just didn't want to be downloaded. But I'd urge you, and I'd urge everyone watching, just look up the images. The images I showed didn't capture half of what it does.
The puppetry, it was fantastic, because if you haven't seen it, everybody in his Dark Materials, if you haven't read the books or seen the television show or the film, has a demon. So everybody is accompanied by a puppet at all times. That's an representation of kind of their soul. So there was puppets on stage constantly and puppeteers everywhere, armored bears moving, and I'm not sure if it is children's theatre, but I just know that I was a child, and that's how I viewed it. It was just outstanding, like really, really brilliant. And it took that level of disbelief. Like, I don't know if any of you watch films, but particularly that kind of fantastical thing, and it's where this story fell down as a film, is the special effects are always, they don't look great and they don't really immerse you in it. But in theatre, you don't need to have amazing special effects that immerse you. You just need them to convince you, just to get you on board, and you'll believe it. Like, I can see there's a man holding that puppet and making that move. I can see you're turning this. I can see you're doing that, but I believe it. And that's one of the things that makes me love theatre. I don't need it to be real. I just need you to convince me.
That is so beautiful. Yes. And it's interesting because, you're talking about being able to see the puppeteers and see all the mechanisms, all the mechanics. And, you mentioned seeing Angels in America at the National. And it makes me think about, you know, what you just said about the puppeteers, about seeing the moving parts and you still believed. There's a line from Tony Kushner's introduction or stage directions or something with to Angels in America, where he talks about the angel in that play. And he says, it should not be magic. You should be able to see the wires. And I've always thought that that gives you such a sense of a certain essence of theater, that you can see the wires and still believe.
Yeah.
The late great Bobby Heenan, who was a professional wrestling manager, has a brilliant quote on this. And we all understand the world of professional wrestling and how the outcomes would be predetermined. And his line is, our job is not to convince them that it's real. It's to help them forget that it's not. And I just, that subtle shift in outlook speaks volumes about, certainly about the work I make and how I go about trying to make it.
And also,
you knew I was going to get a pro wrestling reference in somewhere.
I was going to say, I congratulate you on holding out for 46 minutes.
But it is funny that you brought up that Angels in America, because they did feel kind of full circle to me, because even though they're so different, those themes of, you know, God controlling our lives are very interconnected, and obviously that was also in the National Theatre, going back to that place and as an adult, and I went to that on my own, and I do think going to see, I think Angels in America was like 7.5 hours. Seeing something like that on your own is it's unbearable in one way, because you want to turn to somebody and say, did you see that, or what did you think of this, and I love as a theatre goer to share my thoughts. But yeah, they are both very interconnected in my mind now, and there was definitely that puppetry in both, and that it's just that question of, who is God, who's controlling us, and do we deserve to be punished? That's there. And amazing casts. Angels in America had Denise Gough, it's fantastic, and Nathan Lane, and Andrew Garfield. It was brilliant, really great. Yeah.
That's on MT Live now or soon, isn't it? Because I had bookmarked that to escape into. So you've double
Go for it.
Now.
Yeah,
go for it.
I have to do that too. And you know, we've had mentioned twice, or even more than that, that moment of leaving a theater or leaving a performance, if it's not in a theater, leaving the space. And you think about somewhere like the National, but there are lots of theaters in Dublin where I can feel this as well. But you know, and what you described there, Aifric, of you exit and here you are on the South Bank, and it's huge, you know, the vastness and the water and the people, and yeah, it's, you know, it's such a good point of, you leave the theater, but the experience of big life is still happening.
I miss like finishing an Abbey show, and you have like, again, because I go alone, 2 choices. Either I need to go to the bridge to recover, or I start walking home. So it's like, depends on what kind of play it was. But yeah, I miss even having to make that decision of, I've stepped outside, how do I feel? Where do I want to go to like absorb this feeling? Like, yeah, it's, you know, it doesn't just end when it ends. Like, it ends when you stop thinking about it, which could, you know, from this conversation, it could be never. You can never stop thinking about it. Yeah, I miss more of that. Like, we've had a year with no catharsis. How screwed up is that? Like, of course we're not okay. You know?
Yeah. That feeling of, you know, when you walk out, and especially if you're walking home, or you have to go somewhere to recover, or you've met up with somebody either intentionally or by chance in the foyer, and you're going to go for a drink afterwards somewhere, when you hit the fresh air, when you walk out of the theater and you're kind of going one place or another, but there's the energy of it. Yeah, I know.
Going back now.
We'll get it back. It's coming back. I know it will.
Yes. Wait a minute. This is Angus is this Angus McAnally, the father?
Yeah, that'll be Angus Senior.
In 1992, a 12-year-old Angus Oak, this is his father speaking, a 12-year-old Angus Oak spoke non-stop to me for 3 hours about the theatre of wrestling as we drove back from a gig of mine in Galway.
That's a true story.
Just
I monologued at him solidly for the entire way.
It's something else that you mentioned, Aifric, which again is such a special thing that you experience in a theater context, is the really long day at the theater. When you see 7 hours of something, you go to Druid Sing, and you grab your food when you can, and you try to stand up for a moment just to stretch your legs, and then you plunge back in. It's an extraordinary kind of bacchanal, isn't it?
It is. I think I prefer that when it's one solid story then, because we've all, I'm sure, done, especially during the festivals, kind of those days where you see 2 or 3 shows in a night, and well, it's brilliant and it's great, and you're going from one show to another. I think it's unfair to sometimes the shows that maybe need more time in your brain, but still, I'd still prefer to be doing that than no theater at all.
No, absolutely. Now we won't. Can we just do this for 3 hours, please?
I mean, yes.
I know. Okay, well, let's try to get 2 more in. I'm going to do one more international one, and then we'll come back to an. Oh God, no. Okay. Oh Jesus. Oh, and by the way, we've got Betty Duffy saying definitely we'll be back. I presume she's talking about theater. We'll definitely be back. And is this your mom, Aifric?
Yeah, my mom's on as well.
Oh, so of course. So Maureen Kenny says, still raging. I missed those Dark Materials back.
She was expecting a baby. It was all okay. I think we got the tickets so far in advance,
My goodness. All right. What are we gonna do here? Gee. Okay. Let's go back to this island, and let's talk about punk rock.
Ah, yes, let's. My favorite piece of theatre I've ever seen. I still think it's up for debate in my mind whether Giselle from Fabulous Beast is the best piece of theatre I've ever seen, but this is without question my favorite. I've never seen all the elements of something come together so perfectly as I did with that show. So it was Jimmy Faye's first show after he took over at the Lyric, and as a statement of intent, as a 2 fingers up to maybe conservative Belfast audiences, whatever, like as a I'm here and this is what you're getting. I thought it was incredible. It was Selena Cartmel directing with this astonishing young cast. Many of whom have been classmates together at the Lear. The brilliant Ian Toner there, who was fresh out of the Gaiety too. And I've never seen so perfect a coalescing of a director bringing every strand of a production together, from casting to the performances to the design. A phenomenal script from Simon Stevens. The movement was exquisite. And an incredible design team who unfortunately are no longer with us, the great Monica Frawley and Shaheen on lights. And it was incredible. I mean, Lauren Coe just acting out of her skin. A lot of people would have seen Lauren in Asking for It, where she was phenomenal. Rhys Dunlop there you see on screen as well. Essentially playing the lead and carrying it brilliantly. Ian Toner, who I love with all my heart, is the nicest guy you could meet, playing an absolute bastard. Rory Corcoran in there as well. Just a heartbreaking performance. It was exquisite. It was total package territory. Every single element of everything that was put on stage was excellent. I have a real thing about theatre being excellent. I like really good work. I mean, there's a place for innovation. There's a place for trying things out and, valiant efforts and failing miserably, but at least was brave in the attempt or whatever else. That's cool as well. But this was just exceptionally high caliber work. Again, from a very, very young and inexperienced cast. But excellence all round, and it blew me away.
And it's brilliant that you talk about that as a statement of intent from Jimmy, Jimmy at the lyric. Yeah.
Yeah, and it certainly felt that way. I mean, I think, you look at anyone, I mean, and it wasn't that long after that Selena would have to go and take over the gate. And, those are tricky briefs because, you have an established audience there who you still need to cater for, A, because they deserve great theatre, and B, because you have to pay the rent and put toilet paper in the toilets and toner in the photocopier. So how do you, as a programmer, how do you, as an artistic director, curate seasons that can bring those people along with you while also infusing this sense of new blood? And it fits so beautifully with everything about Jimmy Fay that's what he chooses for the first roll of the dice to announce his arrival. And the fact, here's the deal. Often shows are less than the sum of their parts. If we had a magical formula where we could just guarantee river dance every time we put a show together, we'd all be millionaires and that'd be fun. We're not. It's a tricky thing. It's like it's smoke in a bottle. We're always chasing this thing. And so to have a production genuinely where it was much greater than the sum of its parts, and each of those individual parts were so excellent to begin with, everything came together perfectly. It's rare that happens, but it was so balanced across the board, every single element. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Beautiful. And, as you say, you never can tell what's going to happen. And, you approach watching different kinds of plays with an open heart and, trying to forgive that which might not fully succeed. But it's wonderful to have those experiences where everything comes together and elevates every single member of the team. Yeah. That's lovely. That's lovely. I really, really wish that I'd seen that show. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those ones. I mean, I think, unfortunately, traffic north and south up that M1 is not as frequent as it should be. The Arts Council had made a great move in terms of centralising touring applications a couple of years ago, so that you could just apply through Dublin to do cross-border touring. That's now been undone again, and I presume it's a hangover from Brexit or whatever else, or maybe it's just budgetary constraints. But now, so that's not happening. So then, for certain companies who should remain nameless, who may be planning tours, you have to just completely discount the cross-border dates and focus exclusively on the ones down here. And I think we all need much more of an exchange cross-border, both bringing the talent down from up there and us going up there too. And I kind of managed to see online the other day a chance encounter between Jimmy and the great Katrina McLaughlin, who will be taking over at the Abbey. And you could have gone, this is the kind of conversation that we'd like to see a little bit more of. Let's see what that's going to spark. Because I think the idea that the border is infinitely more hard in terms of theatre folk than it is for general people travelling up and down is something we all need to work on to improve.
Absolutely. I didn't know that funding had that the policy for funding had changed for touring. That's terrible to hear.
Yeah. Look, it is what it is. I'm sure they have sound reasoning behind it, and maybe it'll shake it out as the Brexit stuff settles and move back to some kind of normal in the next couple of years. But it'd be a shame if it stuck that way, because I think we should be doing everything in our power to encourage as much cross-border stuff as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're getting towards 8, but I have my final question for you. But before we do that, I just want to end on a blast, which is another show that Chandrika has.
I know which one it is.
Which one is it?
Are we going to talk about Hot Brown Honeys?
Here we are.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I'm very happy about that. I do realize that I did mention only international shows, even though I have just this like giant, 8-year-long blob of amazing Irish shows that were perfect in so many ways, and I was like, oh no, I didn't spotlight them enough. So thank you.
You'll have to come back.
I will. Okay. Hot Brown Honey is I think one of the most memorably excellent shows I've ever seen. So that was Dublin Fringe 2016. It was a troupe of Australian performers. They were all sort of globally First Nation. They were sort of women, non-binary, and it was cabaret and comedy and dance. and music, like banging tunes. It was the most intelligent commentary on patriarchal colonialism I've seen in my whole life. Flawless, also seamless production. Like, wow, not one tiny glitch happened in the whole thing. It was like, it brought spectacle, but it was just one of the most insightful, intelligent things I've ever seen in my life. Because I think it just, when you take these huge issues like colonialism and put them through the lens of comedy, you get searingly good communication of what it really means. I think that is one of the biggest weapons the universe can provide, is history through comedy, but also through cabaret and music. And it was just like, but it was also, there was one aerial performance in there about sexual assault, and I was sobbing. And I think it's always amazing when dance or something that does not have lyrics and you find yourself crying. That's always a special experience because it's tapped into something weird and intrinsic that you can't describe. But that was woven into this big multidisciplinary show. Oh, I love that one. That was about like making fun of the white Australian girl getting like white girl drunk. But like as a commentary of like appropriation, it was just so smart, and it was perfectly executed. Circus, comedy, music, dance, and but you left going, yeah, I understand more about the commentary around it. It did focus a bit more on Australian history, but I read more about the artists, and they are all First Nations from other countries as well. And they also sold merch outside that says "Don't touch my hair" earrings. And my biggest regret is I didn't go back and see every show. I can't believe I didn't go back and see it twice. I'm so annoyed at myself because it was flawless. And there are so few shows like that, one that doesn't have an all-white cast. So it was just nice for me to go, oh, yay. But like tackling these really important issues. And it was truly intersectional in that way, because it was talking about feminism and women's rights and colonialism in a perfect way. Like, it's one of the most perfect shows I've ever seen in my life. And I'm so devastated they haven't come back. And I always check their website for touring. Yeah, I want that again. And I think that there's space for that to happen. Well, hopefully one day here, you know, like, yeah, we're a few decades behind in dealing with topics in certain ways and having that level of representation, but like, it can happen one day. But in the meantime, I just want them to come back.
Well, and what you bring up about how do we take these topics, which can be unbelievably, which are disturbing, which are the stuff of the great crimes of history and of the erosion of individual lives as well as mass populations. How do we take these stories and these questions and these problems and treat and use theater, use performance in a way to reckon with them? And not simply in a way that they have to be, what's the word, kind of restricted to some worthy, serious, you know, certain kind of performance or form. But yeah, that they can be deconstructed or illuminated in all sorts of forms.
Like art's so good at coming at history from an angle, you know, like when I first moved here, like I didn't know anything about Ireland. I turned up here. I mean, like what you were saying, Aifric, like how did you get into theater? I go where my visa takes me. I don't have much choice when it comes to jobs and my life. I will soon once I get citizenship, but I've had to follow a very restricted path depending on what happened and where. So I ended up here. And yeah, theater was my way of understanding Irish history, of understanding the colonial story here, because I arrived in September and I went to the Fringe and I went to DTF and I went, cool, I get Ireland now. Awesome. Like that was my crash course to understanding Irish society, culture, all of its pains, all of its complexities. I found that theater was just the best way to absorb it and understand it better than any history book, you know? And like, I feel that show was one way of tackling it. But I think even in general, like theater is the best commentary on history. Well, art is the best commentary on history you're going to get.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. I remember my dad is a historian, and I worked on a play that was about basically the 20th century in Poland. It was a dark play, and it was, you know, it looked at the Nazis, it looked at World War II, it looked at all sorts of horrors and terrible things that happened to this one village. And I remember my father saying, this is how you do history, because every single one of the threads of this story are contingent. Nobody's just terrible, and nobody is just innocent or not. You know what I mean? It's not as if anyone deserved to have terrible things happen, but nobody was simply in a bubble. They were all touched by one another's lives and by terrible traumas on all sides. And it is so true that, you know, we work with this form which is inherently subjective, which is inherently about providing an angle rather than a definitive version. Yeah. So my final question is, and this is a question that does not have to cover the performances that you've mentioned this evening or that you told me about ahead of time, but if there was one show that you've ever seen that you could see again, what might that be?
I feel like I already said mine, in fairness. That is the one show I want to see again.
It's really hard. Very hard to put it down to one show. There's lots of stuff I've seen that I didn't know what I was seeing, or I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I don't know. I couldn't choose one. I couldn't choose one at all. I absolutely couldn't. I've seen so many. It was so hard to choose even just a few to talk about this evening. Yeah. I could not choose one.
Can I pick one that I hadn't seen? I sort of like kind of going back to what you were saying, Angus. I didn't get to see Red. I'm an art historian and I missed the best play of the year about Rothko, and who saw it? Why did we all not see it and then see it a million times more? Devastated, will never regret, like we'll never get over the fact that I didn't see it. Didn't even know it was on. So I know that it's not quite what you asked, but I was like, you know what? That was my like one regret in life. But that's a lot about what you were saying, Ango, like that there was not enough of that communication of sure, let's all go up to Belfast randomly on a Friday. That's not the norm, you know, like there wasn't that enough of that cross-border, let's go see that show. Or someone saying, did you hear about it? Like we were, yeah. And I feel that the whole of Ireland missed out because of that lack of like cross-border communication about this show that I think very few of us saw.
Yeah. Did
anyone here see it?
It's totally true. And the other thing, the thing that the real killer, this is only going to make it worse for you. The Lyric do Sunday matinees. You can get an air coach up there, see the show, have a few glasses of wine with the cast afterwards, and still get an air coach home and be in bed by 10 o'clock. It's the greatest thing of all time.
Yeah, I saw one of your shows up there, Angus, like that.
Well, that's true, yeah, absolutely.
The games people play. Yeah, I saw Sunday matinee. It's brilliant. No, and you're so right. I remember when Red just won all these awards, all these nominations, and I just was like, what is this? We have to like organize a bus every couple of weeks and do at least that to get a bunch of us up to just see more of the great work happening up there.
I'm on board. I'll get on that bus.
I'll go literally anywhere there's theater at this point. Like just I'll turn up. I'll go.
Well, so I mean, first of all, I have to say, Aifric, I think that's a wonderful point about the shows that you wish you could see with your eyes now. There are shows that I can think about that I was too jet lagged to see going one way or another. And I just wish I could have a good night's rest and have seen them again because I know they were amazing. Angus, how about you?
Yeah, well, the one thing I'd like to normalize is the idea of going to see shows multiple times. Like, if you think of your favorite movies and how often they stand up to being rewatched, and then if you think about the nature of how we build shows, like how layered they are, how much thought has gone into every element and the dramaturgy behind all those decisions, like those shows do stand up to multiple views. One of the shows that we didn't talk about tonight that I thought we might talk about was a show called Skin Tight that I saw over in New York a couple of years ago. And because the only thing I love more than pro wrestling is Idina Menzel, I flew to New York for 4 nights explicitly to see her first ever straight play, basically. And in the 4 nights I was in New York, I saw the show 3 times. And it's something I've done a couple of times. I've done the shows here when I see something that I really like. I go back and watch and rewatch. Aaron Monaghan talks about it as well. He likes to go and see a preview very early on because the audience hasn't been told that it's a hit yet. So you get real natural responses. And then he'll go back and see a show later in a run to see how it's kind of settled into itself. But that, I mean, I've seen that show 3 times. They announced it was touring to LA and I was very nearly on a plane again. Idina Menzel is an exceptional performer. It's one of the best performances I've ever seen in my life. She was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So I might roll the dice on that one more time.
Well, can we normalize as well following around performers the way that people follow, like theater performers, the way that people follow around Bruce Springsteen or Bob Dylan? Why not follow Idina Menzel to LA?
Yeah, I mean, talking about a generational talent there. I mean, is there a bigger name in world theatre? I don't like. She kept If Then on the road for a hell of a lot longer than it deserved to run, which I also flew over to see. But she's incredible, and I think I think that's okay to treat yourself the odd time. I mean, and I think those kind of if you manage to get your hands on a few bob, and I guess with Ryanair flights to London, you can do it relatively cheap. Get in 3 or 4 shows over a weekend. And
absolutely. And anybody under 25, I saw loads of stuff in National Theatre because they do these like £5 under 25 tickets if you turn up on the morning. I can't do that anymore. I'm too poor now. But if you're under 25, go over there and do that and queue up and get those cheap tickets. It's crazy.
So what I'm hearing is Access Tour Bus.
I like it. Yes. Yeah,
well, we have a place in Access. Just come to Ballymun. We'll just watch our place. Only the best.
Well, we have Rosanna Purcell saying theatre bus to Belfast. Can we bring cans? And I think that would probably be de rigueur. But listen, there are so many more shows that the 3 of you mentioned, and I wish we could spend all evening on here. But thank you so much to the 3 of you for taking this time and sharing so captivatingly about some of the shows you've loved. I hope you have a lovely night, and thanks to everybody who's watching live or who watches back later. Have a great night, all.
Thanks, everybody.
So that live stream has stopped. We're no longer live. That was great. Hey.